Welcome to Life by Design, episode 365. Welcome to Life by Design. I'm your host, Dr. Jamie Richardson. I'm joined today in the car with my pal, Dr. Chris Shoji.
Probably my favorite intro ever. Yes. Yes, in the car with a failing phone battery. Here we are.
We are creators of Life by Design with many locations worldwide. Each week on the show, we discuss the principles of practice of Life by Design. In today's episode, we're talking about how to think, really, is what today's episode. So why don't you walk us through, how you came up with this topic, and then we'll just go ahead and jam on this topic until your phone dies, and then I'll pick it up from there.
Sounds good. So there's somebody that I really respect. A really smart person. I think they're studying to be a PhD in neuroscience. Follow them on Instagram. The question, so they ask, they're really good. They ask the question, is LDL cholesterol bad? So I write, no. And I move on. and then later, I repost. The response was, only one person got this question right. And
oh, wow, nice.
And there's no, not nice. I don't care to be right. I care that people know the truth. So it got me thinking. I'm like, when did we start to accept, public consensus for what was true? And when did we stop, using, the scientific method and thinking for ourselves and you look at these things all over the place, right? And there's lots of bad advice that's going around and it's untrue, and it doesn't matter what it is. We're going to stay out of the realm of politics on this one because It doesn't matter. But it's just disappointing that in the modern age now in 2019 that the people's inability to reason, to want to think for themselves, and to apply the correct method. It's hurting people. Like it's making people, make bad decisions because they're unwilling to either face the facts or they don't know how to get the facts. And that creates, because it's a philosophical issue, right? The idea of thinking, it's based on philosophy, which I think we should dive into and briefly talk about without boring people to death. But it hurts your life. It hurts your self-esteem. It hurts your quality of life. It hurts your happiness. It hurts you. And that's what it upsets me when people, when that's taken away from people.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, this, just even the power and ability to think is something that is not just underestimated, it's something that's actually leveraged both in adults and then obviously I think in kids we see less and less of it. Looking at even my own life and just being exposed more to thinking, to trying to figure out, what is true, what isn't true, and to approximate my life so the action steps that I take in my life are aligned with truth. And I think that's where, for me personally, my life has had the biggest positive influence and impact is when I've realized that something that I thought was actually not true. And then of course, all my actions were tied to that truth. And then it made sense. It made sense as to why I was having challenges or why that area of my life was falling apart or struggling. And I think about all the people who are probably doing a lot of the same things. And even in Think by Design at the seminar we teach, Cray Show, I know for me, what I tell people is if you're looking for an area to focus on, an area where there may be some belief system challenges or some belief system flaws, look at the area in your life where you're having the biggest struggles. The reason you're struggling is very likely because something you believe is not true. I truly see that people generally put in the effort. They generally want to do better. It's that they're following things or actions that are a product of something that isn't true. And so, of course, the results are completely distorted. Yep,
I totally agree. So let's talk about how we got to this idea of like public consensus as truth. So again, going back. So first of all, I'm going to try to keep this as brief as possible because this is going to get boring as hell. The fact that we're humans, right? We're not powerful or can't survive in the cold. Like we got nothing physically. The reason we got to where we are is our mind, our ability to reason, our ability to think. It's that sole thing, that part of our nature that set us apart from everything else in nature. So that's our biggest asset. Now, philosophy is the study of the fundamental nature of life and reality. So you have a philosophy. Even people who listen to that statement and think philosophy is stupid, ideas don't matter, that's a philosophy. That's actually the dominant philosophy of today's thinking, and that's one of the reasons we're so culturally bankrupt. So when it comes to philosophy, there's three major players. There's Aristotle, Plato, and Kant. Aristotle was all about, and this is why I named my son Aristotle. Aristotle's philosophy was that what you see is what you get. Reality exists. There's nothing else out there. The tree is the tree. The pavement is the pavement. The dog is the dog. It's all there. Plato's philosophy was the truth is in another dimension. He called it the world of forms, and he believed that this world was a shadow or a reflection. I know it sounds weird and confusing. You'll just have to trust me. His philosophy was that this world is a shadow of that world. And then the later player that came later was Immanuel Kant, whose philosophy was, and I don't even know how he figured this out, there's an inherent contradiction right at the get-go, was that we don't know reality. We can't properly know reality because all that we know is our own perception of the world. So the truth is unknowable. It's unknown to us. And all we can say is, I see it this way, and you can say, I see it this way. That's all we can say. Now we move to the next branch, which is epistemology. So how do we know these things? Well, for Aristotle, it's easy. If the world is what it is, right? This is why Aristotle is the father of science. If the world is what it is, regardless of belief, we can run experiments and we can have a hypothesis. And if I think something and I run experiments and none of my opinions come back, then I'm wrong and I need to change my opinion because the world acts the way that it acts. Now, with Immanuel Kant, because we can never know, how can we run experiments if your perception is different than my perception? Now we're getting to the crux of the real problem today, which is public consensus. If enough people are saying it, then it's got to be true. If 9 out of 10 dentists agree, well, then by golly, we got to do it. If enough doctors tell me that LDL cholesterol is bad, it's got to be bad. If the world's going to blow up in 11 years and 1.5 million people believe it, then the world's going to blow up. But here's the issue is how do you argue this now, right? How do we get into a debate? And we see this all the time, right? The people nowadays are impervious to debate. They're impervious to having a rational discussion because they're not rational. If all that's true is your perception for you and my perception is true for me, what do we have to talk about?
That's a good point. And it's probably in part why most of those debates are just one person trying to convince the other.
That's right. That's right. And the facts are thrown out the window because there's no such thing as facts.
Well, yes, because there is no such thing as facts to some people. Or they, to go along with what you said, fully believe that those facts are, and again, this is an inherent contradiction, but from the word facts, but they believe that those facts are, again, a perception of the reality, right? It's here's a fact, but this is how you see the fact. This is how I see the fact.
Right.
So, kind of goes in opposition to what a fact is actually supposed to be. I think you see it more so in politics than almost anywhere else. Where people are fact checking and then one person says that's not true. And then another news outlet says, well, it was true because of this. And, I think for the lay person who's listening into this, I can understand how it's easy to get caught up in it and then to just stop even thinking about it.
Yeah. So this is exactly where we need to fight, to make a statement like, LDL cholesterol is bad, that's a heavy statement. Like you don't even need to know research to read a couple of papers to understand that that's not even close in the ballpark of being true.
Well, yes. And I think in health, the area that we work in on a day-to-day basis, we see this all the time, is that people will take consensus. That's part of our cultural acceptance of our physician's opinion. And it's not to say they're not, many, many physicians are right a lot of the time. So,
of course,
that's wonderful. Course. But they're right because they're right.
Right, exactly.
And I think that's what you're getting at. I like your quote, 1 million Frenchmen can't be wrong, from the, I don't know whose original quote that was, but they can be wrong because if they're wrong, they're wrong. Doesn't matter how many people say it, right?
Well, here, forget medicine. Let's apply it to chiropractic. Like how many chiropractors are saying they can treat like conditions that they can't treat, that there's no evidence to support it.
Sure. Yeah,
right?
lots.
Right? Like, oh, chiropractic treats, cancer. Well, no, there's no evidence to support, like not even close.
Yes, and then to go beyond, healthcare, we see this in lots of opinions that people have about, whether it be the school system or politics, as I said, is a big one, relationships. And I think you really hit on the most important point, is that if we're not rational and we're not willing to have a rational discussion that's well thought out, then what's the point in having the discussion anyway, other than trying to convince somebody else to have your opinion in order to get them to do what you would do? What's the point in actually trying to get into something that would approximate the truth?
Well, sure. And this is when you look historically, and this is one of the reasons why history isn't being taught. History today is just about memorizing dates versus actually learning the point. When you look back, when like this type of mentality where we were arguing over emotions and beliefs, those are the most violent and bloody times in history. Mm-hmm. When we started arguing, in the Renaissance and the Age of Enlightenment and in post-industrial America, when people argued facts, those are historically the most peaceful times in history, because you could reason with people. They understood, right. They thought about things differently than they do now.
Yes, I think that's a whole other conversation that people have never considered, the difference between a rational conversation and one that's emotional. And I mean, I'm as guilty as the next person for being involved in an emotional conversation, especially when it's a product of things that I feel are true, and have not that I feel are true, but my understanding of the concept is that it is true, especially when it comes to things with my own family or decisions that might affect me that other people are making in terms of, say, a political decision and so on. So again, for the average person who's listening to this podcast, what does this mean from a day-to-day? What are they getting out of this, Krisha? What's the point for them?
Sure. So the point is, I think just understanding the background, right, and understanding how we got to this point, and understanding that there's, philosophy is important. There's three main players and their general philosophies. I think that's a great point. And I think the other thing is, when you hear a lot of people shouting something, and the more violently or passionately they start to shout it, you really have to wonder, and again, you just have to become a little bit of an investigative reporter for yourself, right? Like, if you really strongly believe something, and you have to be honest with yourself, if you've never bothered to actually sit down and to fact check it, I think it's worth finding somebody, who's reasonably intelligent, that believes differently than you, and having a conversation with them.
Actually, I think that's probably the best point, Krisha, and I think that's really tremendous advice. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I know for me, you and I have had tons of conversations regarding things that we disagreed on. And I know in many of those cases, you've lots of things that I think today are a product of conversations that we've had that I didn't think before. So,
and vice versa, man. Like Ayn Rand's quote is the best. When two rational people get together in a disagreement, one may be right, one may be wrong, but here's the key point: they both benefit. Right.
Yeah, it's very true. Yeah, very true. So that's the advice for you guys today. If you're listening in, is think about
Reggie Gold. Think, damn it, think.
Yeah, think about your life. Think about the things that you're doing. Think about the things that you're thinking. I think it's always valuable to audit your belief systems and say, is this true? I really strongly feel that if you have an area in your life you struggle with, whether it be relationships, finances, business, health, any area that kind of encompasses the major components of your life, and it's been a struggle for you, and it's been a struggle for an extended period of time, I'm going to make the case that there's something there. There's a belief system that you have that is incorrect. There's a belief system that is not aligning with what reality is actually telling you, and you continue to butt your head against a wall because you're taking action steps that are in opposition to what reality is and what the truth is. And if you can dig into that, have a conversation about it, speak to people who think differently from you, I think you're going to get a ton of value from it. So go to the show notes, guys. I'll put anything in there we talked about today, lifebydesign.com/podcast. And thank you as always for joining the drive to 1 million families worldwide living life by design.